The episode was about everyone coming back for whatever reason. Something pulled them away and they came back. And so everyone got together on that street corner to watch that parade.
We didn't know it was going to be the last episode when we were shooting it. We knew it might be the last episode, but we didn't know for sure.
As they were doing that last shot of the parade, we had no idea what the voiceover was going to be.
Where do we go? Who do we become? You know, where every character would end up, you know, in the next chapter of their life, and essentially, how do we end our story?
The narration was written, I believe, after. And they decided to sum up the show long after I was aware of it. So I saw it for the first time when it aired.
Yeah, well, of course, actors always last to find out.
It was very emotional. It was very surreal.
Oftentimes in a television series, they just call up and say, we're not going to put it on next year. And so you've left the audience without a conclusion. We went in the final year saying, we think it's the final year. We think it's the final year creatively. We think you, the network, are going to want to end it.
I think the network was possibly amenable to another season. I think that we were really running up against the problem that the Wonder Years were over.
We didn't really know what we were going to do creatively because, you know, it was a story about relationship, you know, about family, about the neighborhood. And when you're 17, you don't want to be with your family. You want to be packing your bags to get out, to move on.
It seemed like it was a different story than the one that Danny Stern, the narrator, had begun to tell way back in 7th grade. And I think that we had a real fear that we were going to jump the shark if we kept going. So that we knew well ahead that it was going to end, and that episode was written to be the final episode.
We felt very strongly that we had a responsibility to ourselves and to the audience to end the show if we were going to end it. As we got to the midpoint of season 6, we called up and we said, we're going to write a script that will end the series, that will tie up where the characters end up. And luckily, they let us do that. So to be able to take a series from the beginning and give it an end is something you often don't have the ability to do, especially in network television. And to be given that opportunity was fantastic.
In the script of the final episode, it said, Kevin and Winnie make love. And Joanne Savage, Fred's mother, said, well, and obviously they weren't going to show anything really, but they took out that line in the next revision. But it's implied.
The night before we shot the scene in the barn, there was a rumor got started that we were going to ask the kids to do this in the nude. And so when I arrived on the set the morning we were shooting, I was greeted by an angry group of mothers and concerned Wonder Years citizens, basically like a picket line saying, you can't do this. And I said, do what? And they said, they're not doing a love scene in the nude. And I said, you're damn right they're not doing a love scene in the nude.
It's implied that that's their first time. Look, they had their first kiss in the first episode. The last episode, perhaps they found that kind of love for the first time. And it makes sense that that's probably what happened. It's never known for sure.
I think that it's whatever you want it to be, you know, and whether they have their clothes on or not when they're together, it's really just they needed that time together to kind of bring some sense of closure and just a punctuation mark to their kind of 6 or 7 years together.
They're struggling to stay together, but they're also struggling to remain kids. And this is them coming together to try to just bond for one last time before they know things are going to change.
Winnie left the next summer to study art history in Paris. Still, we never forgot our promise. We wrote to each other once a week for the next 8 years. I was there to meet her when she came home with my wife and my first son, 8 months old.
There were a lot of people who were very angry at me that they didn't end up together after the final episode, furious. But the Winnie Cooper relationship is such a pristine and adolescent one, and so fondly remembered as this romantic, glorified moment, that it didn't seem to us that that this was a relationship that had now gone through another 25 years.
You know, your first love is the love you measure all other loves against for the rest of your life. And I think the way it ended reminds us every day of that when we watch it. I think it ended the right way. You know, it ended where they both lived happily ever after, just not with each other.
They couldn't end up together. I mean, who ends up with their middle school love? I think that's why that time in your life is so special. It's this snapshot, this moment in time that exists, and that's why you can look back on it with wonder.
The fact that they're gone is what makes them so special. He could have married his childhood sweetheart, and they could have been together, and they could have had kids, and that would have been great. But to me, there was something more about the yearning feeling of I remember, of those wonder years that in the past that I keep with me in a secret place that the narrator talks about, meant that they weren't together anymore. It was also very important to remind the audience once in a while that this is real life we're talking about. This was a real adolescence where things didn't always work out. It wasn't a kind of a candy-coated fairy story to make us feel better. It was really trying to investigate the nature of life and compassion and mistakes and growing up and love and all those things that are not perfect, that do not always end up perfectly, but have their moments. There is a little montage in the middle of the Treehouse episode where Kevin and his dad are just talking and having a great time, and there's this tremendous, powerful bond, which you didn't see much between them. And for some reason, we were looking at that episode, and I said, and we said kind of, you know, I'm not sure that Jack Arnold is still alive at this point, many years later, because there is something so hallowed about that memory, so finite and special about that memory, that somehow seemed to, in that moment, say, this is not a guy who grew up with an older dad, who grew old with his dad. This is a guy who holds his dad close.
In the last season, we knew that was the kind of trajectory. Was going to be something kind of tragic for Jack.
My understanding was that Jack was based on Neil Marlin's father, and I think his father had passed away. And it was one of the impetuses for doing the show.
They died while they were playing tennis together. He died young, so it was always that my character was going to pass away.
But I believe Neil Marlins had always said that what he envisioned the last episode of The Wonder Years being was Jack dying, because losing a parent is the ultimate transition in life, and that is the end of your Wonder Years.
The biggest bummer about the father dying was that I didn't feel like I finally got to earn his blessing. So Wayne, with all of his struggles, with all of his shortcomings, with all of just the grief that, you know, he put everybody through, I finally wanted that moment where, you know, he looked me in the eyes and was like, you did it, you know, you did it, son. You know, that was, that was something that didn't get to happen.
By the time we came to the end of the show, I really got what my arc was and what her arc was, and that her need to rebel and her need to kind of be opinionated. And it gets back to the fact that she really is basic and old-fashioned and has a lot of her mom in her, you know? So it's kind of sweet.
There was discussions about how those characters were ultimately going to end up, and it was I wouldn't say it was shocking, but I was surprised that Jack ended up dying. I wasn't surprised that Winnie and Kevin weren't going to get together, and I think the way that it was written was well done, and I think that was the right way to end it.
I think it felt very, very, very real, very true to life.
That 4th of July parade and the very last moment in the show was actually our real last moment filming. So it was very, very emotional. And I knew that when I was walking to my dressing room, on that day, and to change out of, Wayne Arnold's clothes, into my street clothes, I knew that was the last time that I was ever gonna walk to my dressing room as Wayne Arnold. And it was really emotional because it wasn't so much that it was the end of the series. For me, it was the end of our family.
I remember the last shot was with Fred. And I got what I needed, and we were done, and I sat down next to him, and I said, we're done. And it was hard to think that, this journey that we all started 5 years before came to a close. That was the last shot.
We were a family. And, it was still a sweet episode. It's just sad that's how it ended.
This is kind of a part of this great moment in our lives that kind of connected us all for this really intense period of time and still connects us. I think whether we talk a lot or not, I think we're always going to be connected, through this thing that we were so lucky to be a part of.
The last thing of the show is something like, I end the final narration, and then there's a voice of a kid who goes, "Hey, Dad, come on out and play," or "Come play with me, Dad." And I said, "Oh, I'll be right there." I brought in my own son to do that voice, and man, I cried. I cried every take. I must have been in there an hour trying to read the last line, and every time kind of blubbery, and it was like, well, we really feel that for you, but we can't use that on TV, so could you try to do it without the slobbering part?
He found that final voiceover very moving, and I think for a moment, he was no longer adult Kevin Arnold, he was Danny Stern, and an audience member feeling that emotion. And I think it's a beautiful thing in the show.
There aren't many TV series where you can point at and say, perfect pilot, perfect finale. Wonder Years did it right with both bookends. There's a lot of pressure on a TV show, especially a good TV show, to put on a good finale. The fans come to it with an expectation. I've watched you for 5 years. Tie this story up in a way that's satisfying to me. And it gets harder and harder to do that. Wonder Years did it beautifully, and it did it by sending Kevin back towards Winnie. But the beauty of it is that even in their reconnection, there's the sense that it's going to be temporary. The narrator tells us that Winnie knew that it was going to be temporary. He wanted it to last forever. And it was a beautiful, perfect moment that will last forever in memory. It's a beautiful ending to a series that began with another wrenching, emotional moment and another beautiful pairing of just the two of them.
Everyone's Wonder Years comes to an end. And you only get one Wonder Years to a lifetime. They live in your heart, the Wonder Years. They live in the future. You see other people having their Wonder Years. For us, we had to tell everyone that it will come to an end and you'll go on to something else. So it ended the way it should have ended. And it ended the right way for the audience, too.
I think that the final episode is the episode that I'm most proud of in the what I felt was the depth and restraint of it and the nature of ending what Neil Marlins and Carol Black had started with the pilot episode. I felt that it was an appropriate end to the journey.
Growing up happens in a heartbeat. One day you're in diapers, next day you're gone. But the memories of childhood stay with you for the long haul. I remember a place, a town, a house, like a lot of houses. A yard like a lot of other yards. On a street like a lot of other streets. And the thing is, after all these years, I still look back with wonder.
Hey, Dad, wanna play catch?
I'll be right there.